Welcome from Endeavour Ireland. I'm Rory Guinan and I'm delighted to be able to introduce our next session with Mark Roden. Mark is a founding board member here at Endeavour Ireland and the chief executive and founder of Ding. Ding is a global mobile top-up service allowing those with less to access more from around the world. Mark is the type of founder that we like best at Endeavour. That is, a serial entrepreneur with 3 prior ventures under his belt. He founded Ding 15 years ago and has grown it to a point where it employs over 220 staff today and has accessed over 5 billion phone devices. Within the last month, Pollen Street Capital took a majority stake in the business in what was a significant transaction. Of particular interest is that this was the first external funding undertaken by Ding, which means Mark's journey is different to many of the more recent scaling companies who take on material capital quite early. Given this ability to scale whilst truly private and self-funded or bootstrapped, we wanted to hear from Mark and his learnings over the 15 years and how his approach to talent and his team might have changed over that time. Mark, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Rory. Delighted to be here.
From the first time you and I met, it was clear how much emphasis you put on talent, getting the best person in each seat right across your organization. Did you always have a heavy focus on talent, or was it something that you figured was missing because of a specific event, or was it driven by necessity when you began to scale?
So I think that my search for talent probably started, not long after the business started. And I think that the emphasis was in fact the opposite, where I put priority over, personal recommendations, people I trusted, who they recommended, etc., etc. So my early days in terms of hiring were based more on personality, emotion. Do I get on with them? Obviously, they had to have, if you like, a base hurdle in order to do the role, and they obviously accomplished that. But if I, look back in hindsight, I'd say that gets you so far. But when you scale, you get greater possibilities with the organization because you've got more money. Scaling implies you're growing. And when you're growing, people are attracted. Outside the organization, people are attracted to join because everybody wants to be, part of an organization that is scaling really fast and that they're hearing good things about. So as the organization scaled and matured, thankfully, so did my way of thinking about people.
Yeah, I've heard that described as parochial hiring. You hire because they play golf with your brother-in-law, or they play in the same club in yours, whatever it is. And it's a particularly Irish thing, being such a small market as well.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. I would, agree with the parochial point. I think, I was never really much of a golfer in those days, and it wasn't so much as looking for that part of the same club match that I was looking for, but it was really doubling down on my own opinion and my own point of view, which I think, let's not be too hard on. Let me not be too hard on myself. I think that's right at the stage you're at. But equally, when you scale an organization and look back, I think you do things differently because I think you have the benefit of hindsight, and happy to discuss that also.
Well, that's one of the questions I was hoping to get to. If you look back and specifically thinking about the team and the people, is there one big win that stands out, or else anything that you change, or was there a loss that you wish you could revisit?
Well, I think, I stepped out of the organization and moved up to chairman. I was always chief executive and chairman, but I felt it would be right after 10 years to essentially get a better perspective on the organization, have a fresh look at the strategy. So I moved into chairman, stayed close to the business, obviously, but I wanted to get that external perspective. And that for me was a transformative event because it enabled me to, stand back and engage with the organization from a distance. And I think that, that gave me, the real impetus on the importance of really been serious about people and talent.
You actually put yourself through the formal external recruitment process, didn't you?
I did, because I'd stepped out of the organization. I engaged Spencer Stewart, really good guys, to conduct an objective evaluation of our leadership team, and also our leadership requirements. So just because I owned a majority of the organization, I felt did not give me a free pass to exclude myself from that process. So what was interesting, though, was when I put myself into that process, and I was, if you like, turning up as both chairman and in that role. But obviously I had been chief executive, and the way that the response came was they said, look, we appreciate your chairman, but you keep answering the questions as though you're the chief executive. And if we're honest, we feel that's the right role for you in the organization.
And even then, the one thing, if I look at your board, you certainly hired ahead in terms of bringing in some of Ireland's best known entrepreneurs and business leaders. So you were not looking for an easy ride, because they're known to be tough taskmasters. How did you approach that aspect of the business and talent?
Well, I have a really good memory of one of the board directors when I came into a board meeting, and one of my non-execs, Ray Nolan, who was chairman of Excelco and founder of Hostelworld, said to me, so you coming into the board meeting today as chairman, or are you representing the interests of management as chief executive, or are you representing your own shareholding interests? And that was about 7 years ago. And initially I was a bit taken aback, saying, how could I be confronted like that? Mm-hmm. And so, it was such a great question, and it always has stuck with me, which is, the reality is, as chairman and CEO, you have a free pass. You can forgive yourself as chief executive through your role as chairman. And as chief executive, you're not going to get that hard a ride from the chairman. So you are depending on the non-execs to keep you honest. But the reality is that, their hands are somewhat tied by you occupying both roles. And if I were to do it again, I would definitely split that role much earlier on, those two roles of chairman and chief executive. That to me would be a really big change in how I, ran the organization.
And after Ray pointed that out, the shareholder thing is one thing you can never unhitch. Mm. So were you ever called out, so to speak, again, at the board for thinking about a decision as a shareholder as opposed to the chief executive?
So two things happened. Firstly, I was extremely conscious of it. And so in board meetings, I'd respond to questions, literally I would announce, I'm speaking as this as chairman, if it was a question to management or to myself, or if I'm chief executive, I'm saying, look, I'm speaking on behalf of the management. So I would give people the context for the question. It's much more important than I appreciated at the time. And to all the founder shareholders and majority owners, I'd encourage you to have a look at that relationship, if that's what you have in place, because you can do it and you can keep doing it, and no one's going to challenge you. But the reality is, if you really want to get the best for the organization, the most important thing is for you to have the highest level of questioning and both supervision and also engagement for both the board and management, because you can't run a business with the management when you're coming into a board meeting and they don't know if you're going to have their back or not as chief executive, and all of a sudden you kind of take off your chief executive hat on and you put on your chairman hat. Mm-hmm. And say, look, what the hell is going on here? And they're like, well, you know what's going on because you're the chief executive. But no one's going to say that when you're occupying both roles. And
thinking about the organization structure, apart from the best people, how much time did you put into how the organization or the org chart was structured in terms of reporting lines or even creating new roles on the exec team?
Well, it starts with being able to engage in a really good conversation about talent and about people. And for me, that means having an excellent chief people officer in the role. And, just like your CFO is almost, your most important go-to person in terms of the everything financial and critical in terms of the operations of the business. As the business scales, you really want to have a handle on that. As important, and I'd almost argue more important, is to have a really, really world-class chief people officer. That means it's got a seat at the leadership table. It's not a function that reports to somebody who reports to you. It's a direct report to you. And and I have really benefited from having an outstanding chief people officer in Fiona Mullen, who headed up this function for Facebook globally up to a couple of years ago. And she just transformed the way we think about people and to be honest, the way I think about them.
And Fiona's a mentor here at Endeavour Ireland, and she did a great podcast for The Multiplier Effect, which is available on Spotify if anyone wants to listen to it. And one of the things that I distinctly recall was she said over her career, what she's noticed is that the CPO or the head of HR has become closer to the chief executive, has become more important and involved, and she sees that continuing. So it's definitely a recognition of this whole topic. And slightly sort of on that, but away from Ding, I've come across founders who have incredibly well thought out structures, even far ahead of some of their larger peers. And it's almost like they're taking it line by line from a textbook. Do you think you can have too formal or rigid an approach to structures, or will it always stand to the organization over time?
Well, the first part of your question is good, because it implies that the chief executive is putting, or that the founder and chief executive, I'm assuming in this case, is putting a lot of thought into this. But the real question is, what are you trying to solve for? And I would say that the priority, again, looking back on our history, is to have both customer and product at the center of decision making. And that means both these functions must report directly into the chief executive. And if that's the founder, that's the way it should be structured. So I think any discussion around structure should follow a discussion around what we're trying to solve, and that should follow a discussion around strategy. So the actual people to go into these roles comes after the strategy is agreed.
And again, at what stage did you hand over the ownership? Going back to Fiona in particular in the CPO role, but at what stage did you think it was appropriate to pass over the ownership of hiring of the people team to somebody else?
Well, I think you never really hand over, complete responsibility for leadership talent, because, your leadership group is the only group that you have direct visibility for on a day-to-day basis. Pretty quickly after joining, through engaging with Fiona, outside of the 6 leaders that we brought in to complement, or 5 leaders that we brought in to complement the 2 existing ones, we then, about 6 months later, added a bench, and that bench comprised the next level of talent in the organization of about 16 people. And if you don't have a bench, then you're not getting leverage from your leadership. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, you really want to start having visibility of people, one layer removed from your leadership team as well, so that you can get a sense for, if that person was out on vacation, who's filling that slot. And I encourage my leadership team to, if they're not able to attend a meeting, to have their, somebody, their number 2 attend, because it gives great exposure to them and helps them mature and develop.
I was talking to another business earlier on. They're growing at 100%, and it was a mentorship session. And they were told that if you're growing at 100%, whatever you're doing today, someone else is going to be doing this time next year for you. So you always have to think about the next person and how you're going to move away from those roles. I guess get out of the weeds. But in terms of having to grow the team, and now you're talking not just the senior leadership team, but the level under them or the tier under them. Do you think the current environment is the toughest you've seen for acquiring talent?
You know, I think if we look back in the last 7 or 8 years, there's always been, immense demand for really good dev talent, for, programmers, developers. There's always been good, strong demand for really good product people. There's no doubt that it's as hot now as it's ever been. But, there's no substitute for not being in that market. If you're compromising on the quality of the people you're bringing into product, and you're compromising on the quality of people you're bringing into customer and how close you stay to that, then it has a ripple down effect. So it's absolutely critical, to pay what it takes to get the best talent in. I know for a number of roles we paid, if you like, call it ahead of our skis. Mm-hmm. And they were conscious decisions that I, to be honest, wish I'd made earlier on in our journey.
And that ties into my comment earlier on that, you did self-fund this for up to last month, 15 years. So do you think you could have grown earlier or hired better talent, afforded better talent, if perhaps you'd taken in external capital earlier?
No, because capital wasn't the constraint. We were making money, after a few years. And so if after the first 4 or 5 years, we were kind of bumping along on an EBITDA positive basis and then scaling and growing. But we probably spent too long admiring the bottom line and not and congratulating ourselves on that, because not a lot of self-funded businesses were doing that. But to be honest, we weren't spending enough time on measuring ourselves relative to the other international organizations that were growing much faster. And if I were to do it again, I would invest much sooner in internationally experienced people talent. Get somebody who is not just a peer, but somebody who's not afraid of you as chairman or founder, shareholder, etc., etc. The toughest thing to get is that honest feedback, and everybody says that they're not afraid to give direct feedback to the chief executive. That's not been my experience, and I'm not like Elon Musk who's going to blow people out of it, on a particular day for saying the wrong thing or looking at them the wrong way. But it's really, really hard to get feedback. And that was one of the things we instigated, was formally setting up almost homework style one-on-ones to both give and receive feedback. And that's something which I think you never grow too big to get.
And what were the key KPIs for those, for the metrics that you tracked?
KPIs to
just track. In terms of measuring how the team is performing or how the team is gelling or the culture.
So first of all, we, if you like, got the leadership together. We really nailed down what is our vision, what are our values, what are we trying to achieve, and we got consensus around them, and they became very much part of our culture. In terms of KPIs, the KPI build and development and implementation process is something that's absolutely critical. The ones that we measure are more around the performance of the business. We look at, we, in terms of structure, we look at, salary plus 50% bonus. We look at KPIs regularly in terms of, we bonus every 6 months. We were quarterly and moved it to 6 months because it was becoming too much like you finish one quarter and you're halfway through the next before you need to start evaluating people. So we're very careful around goal setting, and then particularly engaged around evaluation of those goals after the event as well, and what the performance was of them as measured by independent KPIs relative to or relevant to that sector of the business.
And how involved would you have been as chief executive?
So very involved in the goal setting, agreement of them, you know, and working closely with Fiona, you know, how we're going to make sure each of the senior leaders are set up in terms of their goals. Do I agree with them? Bring in the CFO to get a different perspective as well. So it's almost like a triumvirate of talent evaluation. And then then they're issued, and then after, you know, the 6 months, the goals evaluation process is a detailed one-on-one review. Certain percentage is evaluated to individual goals, another percentage to team goals, and another percentage to the overall percentage of performance of the business.
Pretty detailed. In fairness, would it have been that detailed 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
No.
Okay, so that's evolved over time. Just thinking about the time frame that, you know, again, 15 years is a long time to be in business and the world has changed. So cognizant of that, and let's be honest, the overall lack of diversity in Ireland even today, how have you ensured that Ding progressed and kept D&I to the fore as Ding matured and the wider awareness of diversity grew around you? And what benefits have you seen by being more diverse as he scales?
You know, I think it's a really good question, because, you know, often in Ireland we're regarded, you know, in some ways as being a little bit, you know, on the outside of these questions, you know, in terms of diversity and inclusion. But that's not the way it should be. And just because we're, you know, the last island, you know, in the Atlantic before America, doesn't give us a free pass. So again, it comes down to you as the chief executive. How much do you believe in this? And it's not somebody else's responsibility, it's yours. In our case, sorry,
no, go on. So culture comes back to effectively.
It does, but the culture starts with you, you know, as the leader. You're the one setting the pace, you know, you're the one who sets the whole culture about how you engage with people, you know, when things are good, but especially when things are bad. You know, how are you going to get the best out of people? You know, rocking up when you're in bad form and you know, not happy with things is going to be seen by 20 people as you just walk around the organization, and that then projects, you know, onto their day. So you can't afford to do that. But back to the diversity and inclusion, you know, this is something which, if you take it seriously and it becomes a value that you ask about, and measure yourself with the best measures as are evident in the organizations that you respect. Start there.
So did you look at other organizations and see how they were doing it? That's where you took your line from initially.
Yeah, we did, and we looked very carefully at what we could do in terms of diversity and inclusion. You know, what are the values we want to represent and project on both people we're trying to attract, but also people we're trying to retain. And at all hands speaking about it, and at other gatherings and groups, you know, it's not like some kind of rote message that I'm reading off a script. It's something that I believe and that I'm passionate about. And I think also acknowledging if it hasn't been good in the past, then saying that, you know, and being honest about that this is something, you know, that you're working on.
You mentioned you're all hands. So I'm just curious how, because I know you used to do them in the office there behind you, and they were everyone in used to get external speakers in. How have you managed to do that and build that through COVID, and what might it look like into the future?
Well, there's a great product called Zoom that you may have heard of.
Too much.
And you know, that was just super. We were able to engage some really diverse and interesting people in Ireland. Not many of our international audience will know, I'm sure, of Panty Bliss, who is, you know, quite a character, who brought great emphasis during all our events around LGBT support, you know.
Brilliant. So yeah, they weren't all sort of dollars and cents business focused, although
No.
Panty Bliss is a pretty good business operator for sure. And I know you had Shane Curran in it as well from Evervolt.
So Shane, you know, I find Shane extremely impressive, you know, and I did ask him, you know, a question, because I took on the role that you're taking on today, Rory, of interviewing him. And Shane is an out and out product founder. Again, he's probably not yet at the scale of international recognition that he will be, but he is somebody who is I think he's about 21 or so, and he's founded a business all around, you know, security, and not just building on security after the event, but in engaging with security as the code has been written. And his business, Evervolt, I think, is destined for great things. But I do remember asking him, what if product is not at the center of your organization? How do you think you're going to get on? And he just looked at me like I had three heads, and he said, probably not well, you know. So it was a great reminder for me as chief executive to address that.
And into the future, could you see yourself assisting somebody like that, an earlier stage founder who it's all product? Could you see yourself being the person to come in and, with respect, give them the gray hair about, you know, these are the bumps you're going to face. Don't, you know, at some point you're going to have to pull yourself away from product and think about team and the future, etc.
Well, I mean, you know, the guys in Stripe, again, they're product people all day long. I mean, they're the people I learn from. It's not me giving them experience. It's, you know, I learn an immense amount from just observing really strong product-driven people. Jack Dorsey is the same. People who, you know, take their iPhone out of their pocket and they look at something and the UX bothers them and they go fix it immediately, you know. So, you know, I do have a mantra that I still believe in, which is, you know, as a founder, you know, don't let something pass you by that you can change, you know. And the great, you know, privilege of being a founder is that you get the choice to make change and make change happen. And for me, that's one of the greatest enjoyments that I get out of being a chief executive. I don't always get it right. And I'm sure, as I've tried to highlight, that if I were to do it again, I'd do it better, or else maybe fire myself sooner. I don't know.
Well, listen, Mark, we're up on time, but look, that was super. You're a great advocate for entrepreneurship, and I know your participation in Endeavour, you're very active and you're very giving of your time, and you're always willing to share learnings. So thank you very much, and continued success to you and all the team at Ding.
Thanks so much, and it's a pleasure, and one of my best learning experiences has been involved with Endeavour. So many thanks.
Super. Thank you, Mark.